Okay, apologies everyone for the delay. We still seem to have an internet issue here, but hopefully we'll manage to sort that out. Let's get straight down to business. I should actually say before we get down to business, so this will be the last share on this sugya, and Emir Hashem will use the half-term break next week, Sunday, Tuesday, Sunday for Bekias on the first half of the Perek. I think it's just worth going through the couple of daf at the beginning of the Perek. It's just very, very interesting about Shogeg, and I'll set some more in the comments. I'm still to decide whether I'll give a share on it or not, but I think it's just worth for the sake of completion doing that. And then Emir Hashem, the week after that, we'll start Muktzah. I say there was some trepidation, but I think it's worth us trying to bite off Muktzah and try and get at least something done with Muktzah. That's the plan. Tosfos Divrei Maschal Hari Elu. So again, I was asked just to repeat once more the maths of what I said last time. So very briefly, Tosfos says that there would be a Havamina, without going through all the cheshbon of the sukkah, but just the raw core point. Tosfos says there's a Havamina that Shtei Toldot would be only chayiv 1, and Avon Toldot you would be chayiv 2. How can that paradox be resolved? Why should it be that 2 Toldot are chayiv 1, and an Avon 2 Toldot of 1 Melacha are chayiv 1, and an Avon Toldot of 1 Melacha are chayiv 2? And the simplest answer to that question is because in the case of 2 Toldot, they are 2 Toldot. They have more in common than in the case of an Avon Toldot. And the issue of Shogeg is to what degree at what point do we separate this and consider it a separate mistake? And an Avon Toldot is more of a reason to consider this a separate Shogeg than 2 Toldot, which have more in common because they are 2 Toldot. So let's just try and put that a little clearer. But that's the raw intuition is a very basic svara, which is why should you be chayav for an Av and a Toldot 2 and for 2 Toldot 1? Well, the answer is because 2 Toldot are 2 Toldot, they're more similar, and an Av and a Toldot is an Av and a Toldot, and therefore they're more different. A very simple intuition. Let's just crystallize that, make that a little bit clearer. The chiddush of the Shogeg is that ultimately we only have one lav over here, so normally that would be considered one Shogeg. You're Shogeg in the lav, and it doesn't matter how many forms you're over the lav. Ultimately, Avos Melachos, there may be Lamates Avos Melachos, but they're all just ways to transgress. They're all ways to transgress the lav of Lo Sasakol Melacha. So why should you be chayav Lamates Chatois? So the Gemara learns this out from a series of Gezeres HaKossos. And the chiddush is that each melacha is considered a separate shogeg. So the nidin about an av and a tolda, the view of Rabbi Lezer, who says that you're chayev on an av and a tolda, or because these are separate shem melacha. In the same way there's a chiddush that there's a shem melacha of choresh and koitza and mavashel and baina, and you're chayev 4 chatois for those 4 melachas. So Rabbi Lezer is of the opinion that a tolda of baina is its own shem melacha. Now, how far do we take this as its own shem melacha? So you could say it's literally its own shem melacha completely. I put posted on the WhatsApp group as promised. The Gemara that I keep on quoting, it's a Chavruta in the Gemara, but the words ring in my ear. That there's a tzad in the Gemara that magavin mishum magavin, chodesh mishum chodesh, etc. The Gemara there responds and says, "What are you choosing by saying any of this?" But there's a tzad in the Gemara that each told us its own shem melacha, and the name of the melacha chodesh is chodesh, and the name of the melacha is magavin. So in that havamina, you don't have 39 shemus melachas, you have 39 squared. We saw Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish and Yishalmi. They said each av is 39 Toldot, so you have a vast number of shemus melacha. Tosfos, in his compromise position, says no. The Gemara never meant to suggest that you should be chayiv on each tolda. All Rabbi Lezer held was that, or all the Mishnah rather is coming to exclude is an av and a tolda. But 2 toldos that the Mishnah wasn't coming to exclude, that was already excluded from the earlier Mishnah. Why? Because there isn't a shem melacha, a differentiated shem melacha for each toldos. The toldos have a generic shem of toldos boina, toldos mavashel, toldos choresh, etc. So in the havamina of the Mishnah, were it not for the nimiyot, is that if you do 2 toldos, this is only 1 shagaga, and the shem of the melacha is toldos boina. But if you do the Av and the Tolda, then you're chayav shtayim because you did boina plus Toldas boina, and these are two shemas of Melacha. Maskon is not like that. They're even that isn't enough of differentiation, and you are only chayav for boina, and that's only one shogeg. That's the pshat in Tosfos, and that was the first Torah I said. Yeah, sure, of course, yeah.
Isn't there not a lot of you have the art sitting at the top?
Yes.
You have two lines going down. The other is folder B, but folder A and folder B don't have a line between.
Yes, but just for those online, Adam is saying, is it possible that if you have two Toldos coming out of one Av, so the family tree is you have a descendant of Av A, you have a descendant of one descendant of Av A, a second descendant of Av A, but the relationship between each of these Toldos is to their parent Av, but not to each other. Or their sibling, is there a sibling relationship between the two Toldos? So as Martin correctly pointed out in the last year, there is such a svara. You could make such a suggestion. And you could suggest that Malacha A, Av A with Tolda A1 is only chayav once. Av A with Tolda A2 is only chayav once. If you just do Tolda A1 and Tolda A2, you're chayav shtayim because they have a less close relationship. You could argue that, and indeed we saw such a svara at the beginning of the period. But you could also argue to the commentary, and that's how Tosfos argues. So it's not a muchach, not a muchach svara either way. So this is the first point. The second point to make is I mentioned the Rambam Hilchos Shogeg, and I just want to mention it again. The Rambam is like Tosfos and then goes a little further than Tosfos. The Rambam says that ha'osa av v'toldot of b'hanam achas ein chai b'lachas achas. So that's point number one. That if you do an av and a tolda, you're only chai one. Then he says v'ein sarach lo ha'osa toldas haba shel av achad. You don't need to say if you do two toldas of one av. So like Tosfos, he thought that was more obvious. And finally, he said, also Toldot shel av zeh, but Toldot shel av zeh, yearly should chayav shtayim. So I mentioned already a yearly in the Rambam is very interesting. It means the Rambam didn't find an explicit source, and it means the Rambam had the possibility in his mind, though he didn't think it was reasonable, misvara, that you are chayav, that you would only be chayav one if you did a Tolda of Av A and a Tolda of Av B. Now, even though the Rambam knows that if you do Av A and Av B, if you do Ofer and Choresh, you're chayav shtayim. Nonetheless, you have the possibility that if you do Toldas Ofer and Toldas Choresh, you're only chayav one. Which means to say the Rambam was considering the possibility. Not only, again, we've gone on a journey over here. Rabbi Lezer, we thought there was a possibility that each Tolda had its own shame, and therefore there's a shogeg of doing Ofer and a shogeg of doing Boina, and there's a shogeg of doing Cholev, even though we well know that Cholev is a Tolda, but it's its own shame Melacha. Tosfos then told us that the middle stage was, then no, there's a shame told us Mavashel. The Rambam seems to be considering the possibility that Toldas aren't differentiated at all, that all there is a generic shame Tolda, and therefore, if you do a Toldas Ofer and a Toldas Mavashel, you're only chayav one chatos. Even if you do the Av, you're chayav two. So if you do Ofer and you do Choresh, you're chayav two. If you do Toldas Ofer and Toldas Choresh, you're only chayav one, and the Rambam says, you already not. Why you already not? Because before there is such a shame as told us Ofer and told us Choresh. Harayah, if you do Ofer and it's Tolda and Choresh and it's Tolda, you're only chayav one. But the Rambam had the possibility that all told us just have a generic name of a told us Malacha. This is the analysis of the Rambam as presented by Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, as I mentioned. I didn't come up with this myself, but one seems to also say it. The intuition from which she's coming from seems to be obvious. So this is the first point. And the second point is that we can now ponder in Rabbi Lezer, how far did Rabbi Lezer ever mean to say? Maybe Rabbi Lezer himself only meant to say a havamina that you are chayav shtayim for an av and a tolda, and he never meant to suggest that you are chayav shtayim for a tolda and a tolda. So it's not entirely muchach and Tosfos, which around it is, but definitely now that Tosfos has pointed out to us that there's more reason to say that you're chayav shtayim for an av and a tolda than for tolda and a tolda. It could be Rabbi Lezer himself agreed with that, and he never meant to go further than that, and never meant to say that you're chayav shtayim for a tolda and a tolda. That's the second Torah. And the final Torah I want to say on this Tosfos is one from, again, I just saw this in my scouring of Achronim in desperation out of struggling through the Sugya, is a Ha'ara from Rav Osner from the Shevet Halevi, Rabbi Shmuel Halevi Vosner of Pesach, one of the leading places in Bnei Brak, who reminded me of the Rabbeinu Chananel on Daf Ein Gimel on the base. Rabbeinu Chananel in Ein Gimel on the base brought the idea that Mavrich and Markiv are a Toldot, the Toldot. If you remember the Gemara on Ein Gimel on the base, the Gemara began listing different melachos. The first example the Gemara gives, 5 lines down on page Ein Gimel on Daf Ein Gimel on base, the Gemara says, "Hazoreya v'hazomer v'hanuteya v'mavrich v'markiv kulon melacha achasein." They're all one melacha. So what does it mean kulon melacha achasein? So already, if you look in Rashi and the Rambam, you see the idea that some of them are co-avos, and they're so similar that they're just twin avos. They are both avos of one av of planting. Why are these co-avos? Because they all are engineering and engendering growth. So, for example, the easiest example is Zoreya and Noteas. The Rambam and Rashi both think that Zoreya and Noteya are co-avos. Zoreya is sowing a seed, Noteya is planting a sapling. So they're both so similar that they're just different forms of planting, even though they have different shemas, they have different names. One is Zoreya and one is Noteya. But then you have Zomer, which is pruning, which engenders growth, but in a very different way to planting. And then you have Mavrich and Markiv, which are types of types of grafting, where you stick branches into tree trunks and attach one branch to another branch and things like that. So what's their relationships with? So the Rabbeinu Chananel said that these are Toldot of Toldot. They are Toldot of Noteya. He was of the opinion that Noteya is a Toldot of Zoreya, not like the Rambam and Rashi. And he's of the opinion that Markiv, and Mavrich, which are sticking branches into tree trunks and making them grow, is a type of planting, and it's a Toldot of Toldot. It's a grandchild of the original Melachos. The Av Melach is Zoreya, because they sowed, why Zoreya? Because they sowed herbs in the Mishkan, in the Melachos Mishkan, to produce herbs that would grow and so on. And Zomer is Noteya, planting a sapling is a very different melacha, and in his view, a Toldot. And Noteya and Mavrich and Markiv is a grand Toldot, is a grandchild of a Toldot. The Toldot is a grandchild of it. So it says the Rach. So the Rav Vosner simply points out that were it not, we could come up, according to the Rabbeinu Chananel, with a different answer to Tosfos's question. And because I said that the Reisha, which Tosfos asks a question, Tosfos says that already from the Reisha Shaminon, already from the beginning of the Mishnah, you can hear this chiddush that you're not chayav shtayim. What's the Reisha of the Mishnah? The ha'isa melachas haba mein melacha achas. So you could have, it says Tosfos, why do we need our diuk here on Ein Hayom base? Why can't we learn it from the language of the Mishnah at the beginning of Toldot, which already says the diuk of ha'isa melachas haba mein melacha achas? So he said we could have said that the Reisha is only coming to exclude an Av and a Toldot. But an Av and a grand Toldot, a Toldot to Toldot, maybe they're your chayav shtayim. So therefore we need the Kamash Manon that in all cases you're only chayav one, and you're never chayav two chatos for one category of malacha, for one Av malacha, and anything that falls underneath it. So again, what I took out of this, so again, the point of what I was saying is a very simple point in terms of the math. That you could have thought that an Av and a Toldot is chayav achas, and an Av and a grand Toldot is chayav shtayim, because the grand Toldot is too far from the Av. But again, you see the same idea that just merely being a Toldot or a Toldot to Toldot is a reason to make another Shogeg over here, because as things move away from the Av and drift further, what Rabbi Chananel is saying when he talks about Toldot to Toldot is that there's ever increasing drift away from overlap with the original Melacha. The Toldot is pretty analogous to the Av, even though it's its own Shem Melacha. But the Toldot is similar, somewhat similar to its parent, but its parent itself is only a Toldot of the Av. So it's opening our minds to the idea that we can begin now playing with Shogeg over here, and exactly where to draw the line. And maybe when you have two Melachos which only differ from each other one generation, they're similar enough that this is called one Shogeg. But when they differ from each other 2 generations, they're dissimilar enough that they should be called 2 Shogegs. Now, I can't claim to have any of these forests literally tangible and graspable. But exactly how far apart do things need to be, and what are the forests here at work to determine? But nonetheless, I want to share this because to me it was eye-opening that we need to sort of broaden our way of thinking about Shogegs and there's these achronim, and if they're correct in their reading of the Rishonim, these Rishonim are worrying about where the border is when you transition from something being considered one shogeg to being two shogegs, because they're different enough halachas that is considered making a mistake about two things rather than making a mistake about one thing. That's all I took from this sort of discussion. Though it's hard to be exactly definitive about why you would assume that the border's crossed here and not here. So that's anyway what I took from this. And the Rabbizobin's point is, I think, a nice chaburah of the reminder of Rabbi Hananel, and a nice point just in the matter of the sugya that Rabbi Hananel could have another answer to this question, because once you're living in a world of grandchildren of melachos, you have more possible distinctions. So that was the next chaburah I wanted to say. The final thing I wanted to do in Shiur is read through a Maram Lublin. I was asked by a few people if we could do some more reading of sources also. So I just wanted to learn through a Maram Lublin. This is, I think I printed it on the WhatsApp group. Those who have it. It's I think I called it source 7b, if that's correct. Is that, yeah? So let's learn a Maram Lublin together. Maram Lublin, as his name would suggest, came from Lublin, and he was roughly in the era of the Marshal and the Marshal. That's the generation we're talking about. So we're talking about the second generation of East European Gedolim. So the center of Ashkenaz, due to persecution, began shifting eastwards into East Europe, and you suddenly had a generation of leadership, the Marshal, the Yamshel Shlomo, the Ramah, and the Maram Lublin, and followed by Maral and other East European Gedolim. The first generation are names that we're largely unfamiliar with because they didn't write, but they were the rebbes of an incredible flourishing of Torah in the next generation. These are figures like Rabbi Shalom Shachna, Rabbi Yaakov Polak, figures that probably none of us have really heard of, who were the first generation of East European Gedolim when Torah really began flourishing in Poland. And the next generation were their students, and they were the Marshal, who was an older student, the Marshal, who was the Ramah, who was a younger person, and then the generation of the shot commentaries on the Gemara, the Marshal and the Maram. So that's the and the Marshal rather. So that's where to locate Maram Lublin. Says the Maram Lublin. The Gemara, so he quotes the Gemara, Eilu lafukim in Rabbi Lezer, the Mechayva told him Mokum Av, Chas Achas lefukim Rabbi Yehuda. So that's the quote of the Gemara. Yesh hakshish matzarich lemisli Eilu lafukim in Rabbi Lezer, v'chein Chas Achas lafukim in Rabbi Yehuda. Why do we need Eilu to exclude Rabbi Lezer and Abayim Chas Achas to exclude Rabbi Yehuda? Since we learn the number, go back to the beginning of the Mishnah. The Mishnah, right at the ratio of the Mishnah, already says there's Lama Tes Melachos. And we asked at the beginning of our Gemara, I'm Gimel on the base, Minyan Lomali, what do we need the Gemara for, the Minyan for? But Rabbi Yochanan and Masan Kulam, Bahanamachas Chayv al Kalachat Achat. So if you did all of them, Bahanamachas, you chayv on each one. Or Peish Rashi, Barnatia Chashim, it's only Kalachat Shabbos, Mimenu Kamachata is Chayv on it. It's coming to tell you that if you've got all the Halachas Shabbos, how many Chatos you chayv on it? From this also we should be able to hear. So I told him Makamav, you're not having a told him Makamav. So you can't have any Tuva. In that case, you didn't just have 39 Malachas, you've got many more than that. Or could like the common Perikazorik, Revia takes us the Eldaf Ein, Tiver Maskel Yachol Shematan V'chonos. Now he brings the Gemara later in Perikazorik, which Tosfos cites in Ayin. I printed in source sheets Tosfos, but basically just explain outside before we read it inside so that we're clear. The Gemara asks on Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Rabbi Yehuda is Doresh that there are 39 melachos from a drasha, which we're not going to go into now. Asks the Gemara, if you're Doresh the 39 melachos, why do you need? Obviously, you can't. Sorry, if you're Doresh 39 melachos, you can't hold that you're chayv and told them makamav, because the only relevance of the number 39 is that it's to tell you that you're chayv 39 chatos. If you're chayv and told them makamav, then that means that each tolda has its own same malacha, and then it's irrelevant the number 39. Just go and work out what's a malacha. If cholev is a malacha because mishum cholev, if megavin is a malacha mishum megavin, then you're chayv because megavin is a malacha and cholev is a malacha and mevashan is a malacha and boin is a malacha. They're all malachas, and you have hundreds of malachas. So in the same way as the Gemara asks on Rabbi Yehuda that if he dorish the minion of 39, there's no relevant. You can't consistently hold that you're chayv and told him welcome out. Surely that's already inherent in the Mishnah, which said the minion of 39, which means you can't consistently hold it. You're chayiv and I told him welcome out. In brief, the Maram's question is very simple. The Mishnah at the beginning already said the 39 melachos. What do we need all the other diyukim for? And this question should be familiar to you because it's really what the Ritva and the Rambam on page 1 of the source sheets already ask on the Gemara. So let's just read this Maram inside. He says the common Perek Hazorik via Tosus El Daf Ayin to Masechet Yochel. As we are medayik in the Gemara in Hazorik, and Tosus brings in Daf Ayin. Shem Asan v'Cholot the Parachas, and they ask there. Adiv Rabbi, according to Rabbi, Lemeimet Mechayiv Rabbi. I told him Makam Av. Can Rabbi really say Yochayiv? I told him in place of an Av. Vatani Rabbi Omer Dvarim HaDvarim etc. So Rabbi is dorish from Dvarim HaDvarim that there's a number of 39, and the Gemara says if you're dorish that 39 melachos, you can't possibly hold that Yochayiv when I told him Makam Av. Or Perish Rashi, Hassam, and Rashi explains there. This is what it's asking. Since the whole purpose of the minyan is to tell me how many chatois you have, if you hold that you're chayv and told them makamav, the number of the count of malachos is numerous. So let's make the same diuk in our Mishnah. The same question in our Mishnah, that since there's a minyan of 39, it's not possible that you're chayiv and told them makamav. And from this we should also hear, according to Rabbi Huda, chayiv to fame you also chayiv far more than 39 melachos. So asks the Maram. The oid Yeshi lahakshas, I can ask further. Given to Tana Elu lafukim in Rabbi Lezer, since Elu excuse Rabbi Lezer, Lama Sarich miyotachrin and lafukim Rabbi Huda, kavat Tana Elu v'suloi. Why do you need 2 diukim to exclude Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Lezer? Let's just have 1 diuk to exclude Rabbi Yehuda and Lezer. You don't need both. Chen yesh ladaktik. We can ask further. Tosis to Ramasal Elu lafukim in Rabbi Lezer shkosu. Tosis to Ramasal Elu asks in time Reish Shemina etc. Yesh mefarshim and some say to have a mina mein malach achas hani shtei Toldos me'av achos. Again, the Tosis we just learned that said that you should be chayiv on 2. That we would have had to have a mina that you're chayiv, you're potter from 2 Toldos from 1 av. Avot told us today, but if you do an Av and it's told her, Mechayiv Tati, or Chayiv 2, Kamash Malon, therefore comes tell us. That's the quote of our places, that we would have had to have a minute that we only exclude an Av and a Tolda, but we don't exclude 2 Toldas. We can ask again, Imken, given the Tarch Namisni Besefer, Elu, to Mashma Minor Dafka Others. Since we need at the end to write Elu, which implies only others, Avalil told us, normally the Tani ratio is Malachas Haber, Min Rach Achas. What's the point of the Mishnah which says, Mein Malach Achas? That could have been misunderstood to tell me that you're only chayiv 1 on 2 toldas, but we could have misunderstood it to say you're chayiv twice on a tolda and a tolda, miss out that thing which is unclear, and just learn the Eidu at the end of the Mishnah, which is clear and excludes 2 toldas. So ask the Maram. But now the Torah is now going to give an answer to all of this. The Afal Gav, the Beperek Hazorik, Daika Rebbe, even though the Gemara asks it on Rebbe, Storish Minyan Amalachis, Mikrad Dvarim, Eila Dvarim, etc. Mikol Mokom Aminon, we were Aminion to Masnisan on the number of the Mishnah, Avagav the Balash Min to Masan Kulamachas, Ayval Kolachas Akas, Kinis Kulamana, even though it's coming to tell you that when you do all of the Malachas Behelam Echos with 1 Shogeg, you can have in each one. Mikol Mokom Lenuchalach, we couldn't have proven from this, to know Mechayiv told us Makom Av. So let me just explain what the Maram is answering. Outside, the Maram says outside, if we have a drasha from the Torah that tells me the meaning of 39, it must be coming to tell me that you're only chayiv for 39 and no more, and we can prove that you're not chayiv on the Tolda for Makamav. Because why would the Torah teach me a drasha that there are only 39 melachos? What's the relevance of there only being 39 melachos? Whereas the Mishnah, which says the meaning of 39, could be telling me, since there's an infinite number of melachos, or vast number of melachos once we take into account holders, an efficient way to teach me the halacha that if you do. If you've forgotten all of Hilchos Shabbos and you do a large number of melachos, you're chayiv for each one. An efficient way to do it is to tell me if you do all the other melachos, you're chayiv 39. The point of the Mishnah wasn't coming to tell you that you can't be chayiv more than 39. It's simply coming to tell me a true fact, which is if I do 39 melachos, I'm chayiv 39 chatos. But if I do 51 melachos, because I've also done an additional 12 told us, then I'll be chayiv 51 chatos. We need to think what the Mishnah is coming to teach us. The point of the Mishnah is that if you do many malachos, you're chayiv many chatos, even though you have forgotten all of Hilchos Shabbos. If the Mishnah is it's a way to tell us that you're chayiv many malachos. The legitimate way of saying is that is you do a whole class of malachos, the whole class of others malachos, then you will be chayiv for 39. It doesn't mean to say that if you do more malachos, you wouldn't be chayiv more chatos. That's the point of the Maram. And therefore he says that from the drasha we can make a deal. What's the point of the drasha? But the Mishnah is case law. Drasha is the source of halachas. So from the source of Malachas, why is it relevant to know there's only 39 Malachas? Mishnah is case law, it's telling you a case. In case law, it's an efficient thing to say. If someone did all the others Malachas, they would be chayiv 39. You can't be medayik from that. If they did more than 39 Malachas, they wouldn't be chayiv more than 39 times. So says the Maram. So let's read it again. Even in Perek HaZorik, it does make a diuk from the number 39 to exclude a Toldot B'Makom Av. It's a Dorish Minyan Malachos because Rabbi is Dorish the Minyan Malachos because of the Varim Advarim, not Varim, etc. Rabbi has a drasha to teach me the 39 Malachos. Mikol Makom, nonetheless, our minions of Masnisin from the minion of the Mishnah, we couldn't have made such a diuk. Even though it's coming to teach me if I have one Shogeg of forgetting all the halachas of Shabbos, I'm nonetheless diving each malacha. As we explained above, we can't prove from this. You're not chayv told us makamav. You're not chayv told us makamav. To have our minute because we would have thought to dilma le'onam chayv told us makamav. You are already chayv told us makamav. The Tana to knock at minyana, and the reason why the Tana says the number is loyma to tell us is almi menu kol malachas. If you got all the malachas, v'chil Shabbos b'kulam, and you machal Shabbos with all the malachas, shechayv abayin chatzos achas yechayv 39, and lo knock at rakha office, and he only listed the office with simon of alma. That's as an example, a simon, a mere example, a mere symbol. In other words, it's just convenient to say if you did all 39 malachas, you'd be chayv all 39 times. The nishma because we can hear from that. To call heicha she'osu malachas haba be'al malacha and be'hanamachas. Whenever you do lots of malachas in one hanam, chayv al kolachas achas you chayv on each one. The ein kavanot, the intent of the mission is not loyma, is not to say the dafka mem chasos achas that there's an upper cap of 39 malachas, v'lo yosa, and no more. You have in the knockout to office malachas shehein aliba to kol alma. But what it's all doing is it's just simply listing the non-controversial office malachas. And according to everyone, you're only chayv on 39 malachas, so no pachos. But the Toldot b'makom others, ikapelukta. But the Toldot b'makom others, there is a machlokas. So all the Mishnah is trying to do is it's trying to avoid controversy. It's just saying there are 39 non-controversial, agreed upon malachas that no one debates, and therefore it lists those as the examples of doing many malachas that you chayv on Shabbos. Now I want to pause here because the Maram doesn't say this explicitly, but the next Tosfos asks something somewhat analogous to the Maram's question, which is why do we need a diuk to exclude Rabbi Yehuda, who lists additional malachas of Shogeg and so on? Surely the Mishnah listed all the malachas. And Tosfos says no, the Mishnah doesn't list these two malachas because they're einam of they're not so clear cut. Now I read Tosfos and I didn't have any idea what Tosfos was talking about. Why should the Mishnah not list non-clear cut malachas? On the contrary, the best thing is to list the non-clear cut malachas because those are the ones that are confusing. Those are the most important malachas to list because we'd be the least sure about them. The reason for my misunderstanding of Tosfos is because we mislabeled what's the intention of the Mishnah. We thought the purpose of the Mishnah is to list all the malachas. If that's the purpose of the Mishnah, then indeed it doesn't make sense to miss out two unclear malachas. On the contrary, list them. If the purpose of the Mishnah is to do something else, is to teach me that if I do 39 malachas on Shabbos, I'm chayiv on all 39, then I understand very well why the Mishnah avoids controversy. The Mishnah is not interested in going into the subject of debatable things. It wants to say something clear cut. If I do 39 malachas, I'm chayiv 39 times. The Mishnah, let's not forget, I made a mistake. I started the Perek halfway through the Perek. We made a mistake by learning the listing of the malachas. We thought the purpose of the Mishnah is to list the malachas, and therefore left befuddled. What does Tosfos mean when he says it doesn't list the malachas which are not mavuros? The Maram says no, you have to start the Perek at the beginning. The purpose of the Mishnah is to discuss shogeg, mistakes. Fascinating. The Mishnah only lists malachas in the context of chatois, mistakes. Why does it do that? Because that's really the purpose of knowing the list of Avot. If you want to know all the malachas, you're anyway in a mess because the Yerushalmi tells us there's 39 times 39 malachas. You have to learn the whole of Masechet Shabbat to know all the malachas. It's always dealt with in the first Perek. Habona deals with Menachas Boina. The Mishnah was never coming to present an encyclopedic and exhaustive list of all the malachas. It was coming to tell me Halacha and Hilchos Shogeg. That if I do 39 malachas, I'm chayiv for 39 mistakes, and it lists the 39 malachas which are clear cut mistakes, which are non-controversial. Now, I still don't really understand this, because why does the Mishnah bother listing all of them? It could have taught me the same halacha with 5 or 10 examples. But nonetheless, Tosfos and the Maram both believe this is a good reason of the Mishnah, at least the Havamina of the Gemara, in which it thought this Mishnah could be in accordance with Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehuda. It thought it was a good reason the Mishnah not setting out to encyclopedically list all the malachas, but rather setting out to teach me hilchos shogeg about mistakes that are being made. I'm aware I've gone over time, so I don't think we'll captive if people want to run away. But I was asked to occasionally read through sources, and I'm afraid that reading through sources means that it's a bit laborious. Let's just finish the maram. Told us. Therefore, I had to say Einu to tell me you're only chayv on the others, not the told us. The Lashon Einu bar al kach lamayit eizu tova. The Einu is a miyut. He's running almost as a drasha. It's a miyut to tell me that. The ilotona elo. High miyot and Avot. Had we only done this miyot, have a minute to know by the mayit, and a kashois to stay told us, Ma'avechot, but Avot told us, Shlichai Valav, in the outside. I would have thought there's only coming to exclude two told us and not an Av and a Tolda, but I told you in the outside. So the Maram asked the question, why did the Mishnah, if only the latter diuk, tells me to exclude two toldas, tells me to exclude an Av and a Tolda, but had I only had the first diuk, I would have learned that you are high for two toldas. Why doesn't the Mishnah only say the later diuk? Why does it say the first diuk? So the Maram, because it was never implied by the mashmos. It's not the reading of the words Einu that implies this. It's simply a miyut. It's an additional exclusionary word, a word that implies exclusivity that's telling me to exclude something. It's not that this specific language tells me what's excluded, and therefore it's only because I had the ratio of the Mishnah which told me that an Av and a Tolda, or an Av, a Tolda and a Tolda only chayv one. But I can now use the second miyut to tell me that an Av and a Tolda is chayv one. That's the second chiddush of the Maram, that we're not learning Peshat in the Mishnah, we're learning Droshet in the Mishnah. Not that the Gemara is arguing that the reading of the Mishnah implies this, it's arguing that the extra word in the Mishnah comes to tell me to exclude something, and I now need to work out what the most reasonable exclusion is. I'll stop there because I've gone over time, but I hope that gives us a bulk reading in the Maram, and Emit Hashem, we will review Shiur, we will continue Shiur in a week and a half's time, the formal learning of the Sugya with Muktzah, but in the meantime, we'll do a little bit more work around Shogeg. Thanks so much for everyone, and those who will be away, enjoy your breaks.
Sure. Oh yeah, okay.